Okay, so for our week 2 reading about connectivism, um, I read through all of the website and then obviously went and researched a bunch of other websites, listened to some lectures, things of that nature. And what my takeaway is that it's basically a learning theory that addresses how learning has evolved to where it is right now because of how we use technology. So, sitting in rows with a textbook, receiving lectures is outdated. And students are learning more on their own than they are in this type of structure. So, it gives the learners an opportunity, connectivism gives learners an opportunity to learn what they want, when they want, and how they want on their own terms. So to go more into that, addressing the idea of who is the teacher, I think with connectivism, which is more natural than just a theory, it's just kind of how we find information now. And it's often self-taught or has many teachers, or it's a complex combination of both of these things. When we stop to think about it, do we really take classes today because we want to learn something, or do we take classes because we have to take them? Even in college, high school, we have to take these classes and sit in these classrooms and attend lectures and do all this because somebody has told us that this is the box you have to check to get this piece of paper that you want. So to get a high school diploma, you have to attend all of these classes and get these marks. To get your degree, you have to attend all of these classes and get these marks. But when we actually want to learn something, there's a skill or some kind of knowledge asset that we want to acquire, our first natural response isn't going to be, let me go see if they have a class for that at the university. We're going to Google it. We're going to go find a tutorial video. We're going to find somebody who has done it. And more than likely, we're going to pull out our cell phone or our iPad or our laptop, and we're going to go find somebody who has shown us digitally how to do this, or engage in a conversation through social media with somebody who knows how to do the thing we're trying to do. And essentially that's why connectivism is here now, because that's how we actually learn right now. And then we as the learner can be anyone. So the question of who's the learner, the student is obviously the learner, but the teacher's the learner, and the community is a learner. And when I say community, I'm not saying our typical ideas of what community engagement is, like the people who live around us. I'm sorry, I will wait for the sirens to stop. Okay. But an online community. And so we learn collaboratively through online communities. For example, I learned Photoshop so that I could support my husband's photography business. And it has nothing to do with my degree, nothing to do with my primary employment or anything like that. And I know how to paint. I'm an artist. And so I figured I could learn Photoshop. But I didn't go sign up to take a Photoshop class at a local adult school or college campus. I went to YouTube and watched tutorials, and I went to online forums where other people who have already mastered certain skills in Photoshop are explaining how that works. And if I had a question, I would go to these places and pose those questions and engage in conversations with other people who were learning the same things that I'm learning, maybe at a lower level, maybe at a higher level. And in that situation, you are the teacher and the learner, because other people are asking questions you know how to answer, and you're asking questions other people know how to answer. And it's really not a teacher-student situation so much as a parallel learning situation where you have people that know and need to know, and that role switches. And with constructivism, that's what you're going to see is parallel learning. And sometimes you're going to have students in your classroom who know how to do something you don't know how to do digitally, more than likely. So I teach 8th grade English, and my students might not come into my classroom knowing the difference between a utopia and a dystopia and being able to analyze how that parallels our society, but they know how to operate digital communities better than I do. And we have something then to teach each other, because, for example, I want to integrate something into our classroom like Padlet, which I had no idea how to use. And instead of thinking, oh, well, I need to be an expert on this, I had the thought of, like, I probably have students in my classroom who know how to use this or could figure out how to use this way quicker than I could, and they can be the expert, and they can teach me and everybody else, and there's nothing wrong with that. So then we're looking at creativity, and there's a spot on the website that says creativity needs arts and humanities, and it breaks down that, if we're only focused on STEM learning, that we're going to lose creativity as a culture and as a society. And I understand where they're coming from. However, I also think it's really important to remember that STEM learning in itself doesn't lack creativity. I think oftentimes we make the mistake of assuming creativity means art and means humanities, music, and that's not what it means at all. We use creativity when we do those things, but George A. Fuller used creativity when he built the first skyscraper, because everybody else was building these buildings that required, all the weight to go on the outside walls. And he was like, hey, there's this new kind of steel. I bet that I could put pressure on the inside walls and build the building even taller. And that's creativity. He thought of it in a new way. There wasn't necessarily a problem, but he came up with an answer to a problem we didn't even know we had yet. The same thing for Bill Harley, right? Who made the V-twin engine for the Harley-Davidson motorcycle. There wasn't a need necessarily. It wasn't like, hey, somebody came and told him, you need to build a V-twin because that's what we need right now. He looked at it, had a thought, hey, I could build it this way with 2 cylinders, and it would go faster and it would do more, and nobody had done that before. And he was an engineer. So we find creativity in our engineering and in science when we ask questions that nobody else has asked before, when we test our hypotheses in ways nobody else has tested them, when we interpret data in a way that isn't the way it's been interpreted before. I think it's not that arts and humanities are going to make creativity survive. I think it's that we need to encourage creativity in our STEM classrooms just like any other classroom. So that brings us to inquiry-based learning and project-based learning, because that's exactly why we have creativity in STEM classrooms, is when it's inquiry-based. Creativity is fostered when you're trying to answer a question and you don't know the answer yet, and there's not a teacher there who's going to tell you, hey, this is the answer. When I plan a lesson in English and I'm asking my, new language learners, what is the noun in this sentence and what is the verb? There's very clearly a right answer that has already been established that I know the answer to and I can give it to them. But when we're asking questions like George Fuller asked about how to build a building, like Bill Harley asked about how can I make a 2-cylinder engine, those are inquiry-based learning that's going to lead to creativity. And this is when the learner becomes the teacher, because they are deciding they want to find the answer to this question that nobody else around them has the answer to. And they have to go find it out. They have to search for it. And they're finding something new, and they're learning, and they're teaching themselves through that experience, through collaborating with other people that have little bits of information that they're going to need to answer that question. And as a teacher, our job to foster inquiry-based learning isn't to come up with a question that we already know the answer to and then steer them to that answer. It's to find out what they want to know, help them to really pinpoint what that question is, and then continue to provide inquiry and use questions and challenge them on the answers they think they might have to further them along that path to finding the answer that they want and that they need. And oftentimes this is found in project-based learning, because that's a lot of work. It's not something you're going to do on a text dependent question. It's something you're going to do where when you're trying to solve a problem, that's very all encompassing. It's a project. There's going to be data, there's going to be trials, there's going to be some kind of output. And a real project-based learning isn't, hey, we read this book, make a poster about it. Or, oh, we're learning about this in history, let's make a propaganda poster for this war that we're learning about. Those are great engagement activities to put the student in a place where they can communicate, some of their learning that they've gotten from you or from a textbook. But that's not constructing learning. That's not connectivism as found by project-based learning. Real project-based learning in this sense is trying to solve something and heading in a direction that's your own, and using connectivism and all of your network, digitally and otherwise, to arrive at this conclusion. And then we have a responsibility as teachers to guide them on how to best present their final learning. The challenge of, how this looks in a classroom and when you design learning spaces was interesting to me, because you think about setting up a classroom, and I don't know a single teacher who's ever been able to say, hey, I'd really like to design my classroom. And they're like, yeah, sure. Where do you want the outlets to go? And what kind of desks do you want? And you don't have that kind of autonomy. You walk in, these are the desks you have this many outlets, you have this kind of carpet, and hopefully your desks match, and hopefully there's, a place to plug in a computer somewhere. And so we have to get creative, and we have to be really intentional. And those choices come in less awe-inspiring ways than what you would read in an article like this. But we can make choices about how we orient our desks. We can make choices about what is the front of the classroom. I recently made the decision to do away with front of the classroom in my class, where I don't stand in the front of the classroom and teach. We don't lecture. My colleagues and I that also teach 8th grade, class is out at 3:05, and from 3:05 to 4:30, we lesson plan, and we record our lesson the same way we would do it if we were presenting it to the live classroom. And then that lesson we give to students using Google Classroom platform. I co-teach English, which means that a large amount of my students are special education students, and I also teach GATE, so gifted and talented education, and both classes require a huge amount of differentiation and scaffolding. One, you're usually scaffolding from here to build them up to grade level, and in the GATE program, they are really comfortable right here, and you want to scaffold them up and try to get them to ask more depth, and to go after more information than just what's required to pass. And we have found that in flipping the classroom this way, where their lessons are on their Chromebooks and they can rewatch them and they can pause them, and they have an interactive notebook where they're communicating with the video and they're communicating with each other, and they can put comments on the classroom, and they can stop the video and they can have a conversation and then apply what they learned from the conversation to the work they're doing with the video. That our special education students are receiving the scaffolding they need because they can rewatch the videos, they can pause the videos. we can provide them with those things. They can listen to it. They're getting a visual representation. They're getting audio representation. They're writing, they're interacting, they're collaborating. And then the GATE students, they can work at their own pace. If they already know this, then they don't need to watch the entire lecture. They go through, they try to do the performance task that shows mastery, and then if they don't get it, they can go back and watch the video at the part that they missed. So for me, making the choice to set up the front of my classroom is your desk. The front of your classroom is the screen on your computer. And I think it's really natural for these students because, as I said back in the beginning of the video, that's what we naturally do now when we want to learn something. We crank open a computer and our phone and we go look for a video. And so for these students to come in and sit down and get ready to learn something by opening a Chromebook and getting ready to watch a video, it's natural. This is how they seek out learning. And that's how they're going to seek out learning in my classroom. And they can take this Chromebook to home, to grandma's house, on vacation, and it goes with them everywhere. So if they want to finish work at home, or if they go on independent study, or they need help with their work but they don't know how to explain it to their parents, they can pull up the video. Their parents can watch my lesson and know exactly what their students are learning. So it really is, it can go anywhere, anytime, any place with them. Just like how we use our cell phones to learn and find any information we want at any time. So 2 examples that I found interesting were the article about Finland. It was awe-inspiring, but also intimidating because there's so much that their education system is dependent upon their culture as a whole, which we can't mimic. We have our own culture, and we can't revamp the entire American culture just to try to have an education system that mimics Finland's. But I did like this idea that teachers are on a first-name basis with students. They're not above and demanding this kind of worshipful respect that we do. But instead, they've earned their respect because the society respects them and because they parallel learn with the students, and they're seen as an important component to the learning process. And I think that's something that we need to take a look at. How do we achieve that? And then High Tech High, and their format of all of the learners being equally as valuable. So I mentioned that I co-teach classes and GATE and honors classes, and the students know the difference. They see each other. Oh, your first period, Miss Mikola, your first period is your SMART class, right? And I say, no, my first period, second period, third period, fourth period, and fifth period are my SMART classes. And they're like, no, we're not the SMART class. We're the special class. We have 2 teachers. And I think there's something to be said for High Tech High, making sure that there's an importance and emergency placed on all learning situations, and there's not an elitist class of learners who deserve more rigor. All of our students deserve rigor, and all of our students deserve an elitist position in our classrooms because they're the reason we're there. So to bring it all back around, I think constructivism, again, is just our way of explaining how we have now come to seek information as a society in this technological age. We freak out when we don't have our phones. And my question is, I guess, going forward from here, that I will be then looking for, because I'm a learner also. So my question and my next step in the inquiry process around constructivism is going to be, are we attached to our devices and our access to the internet and our phones and our ability to pull it out and do anything we want with it whenever? Is that attachment because we are addicted to a technology itself? Or is that attachment because we've grown so used to being able to learn whatever we want, whenever we want, however we want, on our terms, that when that's taken away, we can't stand the idea of not learning?